now we're back to Republicans providing Mr. Kavanaugh with his daily tongue bath. So we will just, I want to share my rant with you, and then we will pick up your phone calls here. I want you to think about this scenario, all right? And I just want to ask you, does this sound crazy to you? I walk into a 7-Eleven and I rob them. I walk out with $74 in cash and a case of Coke. I get arrested in the parking lot. They drag me off to jail. The next day I'm in court, and the judge says, well, what do you have to say for yourself, Mr. Hartmann? And I say, there is no mention of 7-Elevens in the law. You cannot prosecute me. There are laws against robbing pharmacies, very specific laws against robbing banks, but there's not a specific law against robbing a 7-Eleven. So you have to let me go. Now, it sounds crazy, right? I mean, just like certifiably crazy. But here is the reality. This morning, in the hearings with Brett Kavanaugh, when Orrin Hatch started talking about the Chevron deference, that's what they were talking about. The billionaires who own big oil companies and big coal companies are very bent out of shape about the fact that the EPA has the power to regulate them. And back in 1984, when Neil Gorsuch's mother, Ann Gorsuch, was the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, she argued that under the Clean Air Act, the EPA could not block mercury coming out of coal-fired power plants because the word mercury did not appear in the law. Now, this went to the Supreme Court. The case was called Chevron versus NRDC. And the Supreme Court ruled, no, if the enabling law that created the EPA and it doesn't have to say mercury. All it has to say is your job is to keep the environment clean, and then the EPA brings in experts and they decide what's dangerous and what's not, and they've identified mercury, and so mercury is illegal. That's the state of the law right now. Right now, a judge would say, no, you robbed a 7-Eleven. That's robbery, even though it doesn't mention 7-Eleven. But what Orrin Hatch said this morning is that he and his Republican colleagues are preparing legislation to overturn that Chevron decision so that the EPA can no longer regulate something unless Congress specifically names that thing, which, of course, would be impossible. I mean, there's 80,000 chemicals out there, right? This is how bizarre it's getting. We'll pick up this thread right after the break. In the Chevron case, basically what the court said was, the Supreme Court said was, of course, if you have legislation that says we're going to create the Environmental Protection Agency, that the mandate of the Environmental Protection Agency is to protect the environment, we are Congress. We're not going to sit here for 2 years with thousands of hearings over hundreds and hundreds or thousands of hours listening to experts to decide which of the 80,000 chemicals in our environment are the dangerous ones that need to be regulated and which ones are the benign ones. That's not our job. Our job is to say, EPA, protect the environment, and then give you guys a budget, and you go out and you bring in the experts, or you hire the experts, and you decide based on the parameters of the law. You decide what regulations are appropriate, what are inappropriate, and what the penalties should be for violating those regulations. And those will be subject to oversight of the courts, but only if they fall into a couple of simple categories, which is the agency, is the EPA, in this case it was the EPA, is the EPA actually behaving, consistent with the law? Are they behaving in good faith? If so, we leave them alone. Or are they behaving in a way that is patently absurd, that is ignoring the law or even violating the law, in which case we intervene. So Ann Gorsuch, Neil Gorsuch's mother, when she was running the EPA, and she ended up resigning in disgrace from the EPA, it was a scandal, she argued that unless the law specifically names a chemical that the EPA has the authority to regulate, they no longer have the authority to regulate that chemical. In this case, it was mercury. The Supreme Court said no, the law does not have to name the chemical. The law has to name the goal of the agency. Orrin Hatch this morning, in his questioning of Brett Kavanaugh, pointed out that he and several of his colleagues, his Republican colleagues in the United States Senate, who are heavily funded by Koch Industries or the Koch brothers or ExxonMobil or other, heavy-duty polluters, coal companies. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to the environment. This will get extended if Orrin Hatch has his way. This will get extended to the regulation of banks, to the regulation of hospitals, to the regulation of pharmaceuticals, to the regulation of our food supply. Every area where our government is currently protecting us, and some billionaire can make a little more money by hurting us, they are going to try to take down that protection. And what Orrin Hatch said to Brett Kavanaugh this morning is that him and a bunch of other Republicans are preparing legislation to blow up the Chevron. He called it the Chevron doctrine. It's typically referred to as the deference. In other words, we defer to the regulatory agency, to their judgment. It's not the job of the court to make these decisions. It's the job of the EPA to decide what is and what isn't dangerous in the environment. And Orrin Hatch said, we're going to blow that sucker up. I mean, obviously not his words, but essentially. And Brett Kavanaugh just sort of nodded and went along with it. And nobody said, what? What the hell? This is exactly the case of my walking into a 7-Eleven and saying, give me all your money. And then going into court and saying, the law does not say you may not rob a 7-Eleven. It says you can't rob banks. There's a lot of retail outlets out there that have the word bank in their name. Wells Fargo Bank, Bank of America. I can't rob them. And there's a specific law about robbing pharmacies. And there's all kinds of companies out there, Johnson's Pharmacy, Smith's Pharmacy, Acme Pharmacy, Chicago Pharmacy. You can't rob them. But the law does not say I may not rob a 7-Eleven, and therefore I'm robbing the 7-Eleven. As bizarre as that logic is, that's the logic that the Koch brothers and the other billionaires want applied to environmental and other laws. The other one is the mens rea thing. I mentioned this at the end of my conversation with Congressman Pocan. Mens rea means state of mind. And the so-called criminal justice reform that the Koch brothers and other right-wing billionaires are promoting, and that major corporations are supportive of, is legislation that would require, in cases of white-collar crime, that the state of mind of the person being charged be taken into consideration. Now, certainly, state of mind has a place, right? For example, if somebody hits somebody with their car and kills them, that's manslaughter. But if they do it maliciously, if they do it intentionally, hit somebody with their car and kill them, that's murder. I mean, it's state of mind has something to do with it. So there's a basis for mens rea, right? I mean, it makes sense at the state of mind. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that if the CEO of a company says to the senior management and then down the line to management, those safety devices that we have on the machines on the factory floor, we just can't afford those anymore. We're spending, $20 million a year on safety devices. We're just going to do away with them. And as soon as they're done away with, Joe Blow dies on the assembly line, gets his hands chopped off and bleeds out on the floor. You would have to, in order to prosecute the person who got rid of the safety equipment, you would have to prove that their intent was to kill Joe Blow. Otherwise, you can't prosecute them. Now, I would say that that's negligence, if nothing else, but no. They want to blow up the negligence defense. Now, they don't want to do this with regard to things like you're driving down the street and you're texting and you hit somebody and, you should have known better, right? For regular criminals, no problem. Throw them in jail. But for people running companies, if they make decisions that poison people, that kill people, that injure people, that ruin people's lives, you have to prove that that was their goal. That when that banker decided that he was going to sell these crappy subprime mortgages, it was his intention to have all those people end up homeless. And of course, you could never prove that. What, are they going to put it on a billboard, write a letter? In most cases, that's not even their intention. I mean, if they gave it any thought, they would know that that would be the consequence of their action, but it's not their intention. Their intention is to increase profits. And so these two things, blowing up the Chevron deference and building mens rea into white-collar criminal law, this is the wet dream of the billionaire class right now. To essentially completely neuter the Environmental Protection Agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the banking oversight agencies, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, all of these agencies get, the Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, they all get neutered if you do away with the Chevron deference. And the ability to hold billionaires and CEOs to account when the actions that they take cause destruction of lives or property or anything, the environment, they want a get out of jail free card. And this guy, Brett Kavanaugh, is going to be eager to give it to them.